Thank you. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, as Kirsa mentioned. Sejal Goel graduated from Durham University in 2023 with an MA in Conservation of Museum and Archaeological Objects. She worked as a conservator for the Wiltshire Council's Conservation Services in the UK, as well as a Crest Fellow with the Missouri Historical Society. Acting as the primary conservator for the Gateway to Pride exhibit. She now works with the National Park Service as a postgraduate fellow, thanks to the Great Basin Institute. She is especially interested in object and paper treatments, conservation science, and environmental sustainability in museums. Sejal.
Thank you very much. So my name is Sejal Goel. I am a GBI fellow with the National Park Service out at Harpers Ferry Center. And this is my presentation on handling expectations and adaptations, conservation with the National Park Service. If I could have the next slide, please. So just sort of an overview of what I will be talking about in this presentation. I'm going to explore the model of conservation at Harpers Ferry, and then use that to explore the projects that have sort of challenged my personal expectations working as a museum conservator, as defined as sort of working in one space with one collection compared to working with multiple sites like through the National Park Service. This includes the treatment of a wide selection of silver tableware from a historic house, the communication between conservators using different treatment approaches for silverware knapsacks, and the preparation of an early 20th century trunk for reproduction. Next slide, please. So just a real quick overview about conservation at Harpers Ferry Center. The National Park system includes over 420 sites, and this includes national monuments, national historic sites, national parks, and national battlefields. And this is over 49 million objects throughout the US, Guam, and American Samoa. And so that top image there is sort of the general layout. That is the only image I have found with the updated amount of parks, and it's still not very clear with the density, especially on the East Coast. All of these projects are primarily funded through project money that parks get in order to fund both exhibits, conservation, new trails, etc. And so because of this, a lot of our work is bound by fiscal year and is therefore more akin to a private practice compared to a museum organization. Next slide, please. So in thinking about conservation projects through the National Park Service, we can tell parks what needs to be treated based on condition surveys, but we also really rely on them to determine their curatorial priorities, both for each year and into the future. Sites have varying associated objects. This includes sort of natural history collections for a lot of the national parks, archaeology related to the parks, both historic and prehistoric, as well as objects that were known to be present at the site during specific points in history or related to a specific person that was important in the park, and also objects that were sort of tangentially related through time period that have been purchased by the National Park Service. These, of course, all represent different needs based on their value systems, but in general, a lot of what we do is stabilization, restoration to a specific time period, or replication. Next slide, please. So the first project I wanted to talk about is the Eisenhower Silver Project. This is for Eisenhower National Historic Site out in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It's a site that's a historic farmhouse that is on Gettysburg battlefield, where the president and the first lady used as a weekend retreat and met with world leaders, and then also retired there following his presidency. What's really interesting about this site, it is specifically interpreted to 1959, when both of the Eisenhowers were alive. So this collection hosts several hundred individual silver pieces, including flatware, decorations, and tableware. And many of these objects are on active display throughout the year in the dining room of the house, specifically for their Christmas decorations, where they have a full dining set out. So this project really required a lot of research, specifically into object history, in the sense of most of the object records were written in the 90s and early 2000s with very limited understanding of how they worked as a whole. Eisenhower purchased silver for his wife Mamie over the course of their marriage starting in 1916 through to his death, and the two were also, of course, gifted many silver objects from foreign dignitaries and friends. So in this collection, we have ID'd silver coming from at least 7 different countries with 38 separate companies represented in this collection. What was also really interesting is the types of material that were apparent because a lot of the material was identified as silver in the catalog. However, of course, using XRF analysis, we were able to tell that a lot of it was not silver, which is very difficult to tell a curator. And so one of those objects is that cute little silver tower on the end, which is added confusion because it says silver in French on the object, but it is in fact a white metal alloy. So in general, these objects showed, of course, a lot of tarnishing and scratching, both from use life and from storage, and previous polishing compound residues all over the objects, given that they were polished by staff at Eisenhower's house during his lifetime. Next slide. Thank you. So this is sort of the general overview of how the project worked. First, we identified if there were coatings on objects, and then from there we went through if they were plated versus if they were solid sterling silver, and how to polish them then. And we figured out as well that we really needed to coat all of this silver because it's going into a historic house with very limited environmental control. And so this is also an issue because the staff at parks are not always museum professionals in their own sense. It's a lot of collateral duty of the superintendent of national parks in order to take care of collections. And so we really wanted to have something that the curator did not have to worry about going into the future. This also sort of expanded my own repertoire in the sense of working on how to apply these coatings. We are using both brushing systems and spraying systems and deciding sort of when one is more appropriate over the other. Finally, probably the biggest issue with this project has been measuring completeness of the coatings. Of course, the most common use for silver coatings is coumarin dye, but Winterthur has recently found out that this system fails quite quickly when in unregulated environments. And of course, with our system, we know it's going to go into a space that varies greatly. So instead, in order to sort of determine the thickness and continuity of our coatings, we've decided to try to use a continuity meter, which determines if there is a complete circuit between 2 different points on metal, which is this little device here. It lights up if it creates a complete circuit. And so if an object is coated properly, it should not react with the continuity meter. Next slide, please. The next project I want to talk about is some knapsacks from the Harpers Ferry National Historic Park, which we, of course, are minutes away from. So these are 3 Civil War era, circa 1864 knapsacks made of waxed canvas with leather straps and brass and iron alloy fastenings. These objects were excess, we believe, left in storage sort of after the war because it was determined that all of the soldiers hated them. And so this sort of long period of unknown length period of unregulated historical environment has caused a serious amount of deterioration, including a lot of the leather was stuck to the canvas due to the coating on the canvas and has left hazing and such like that. Furthermore, of course, all of the metals were corroded. It's West Virginia, it gets very humid, and there are losses and tears in the canvas themselves. One of the great things about working at Harpers Ferry is we are a relatively small team with a wide discipline base. So we have a textile conservator, a wooden furniture conservator, a book and paper conservator, inorganics, and organic specialties. So we were able to sort of discuss between the different departments quite easily of how do you deal with a composite object like this? And one of the greatest things is we discussed with the book conservator on how to make cast paper fills, where you take a cast of a similar material, in this case canvas, and then you put your Japanese paper into that with some acrylic paint, and that gives you the same texture as the object, which is that picture on the far, my right. And so that worked really well, which is the circled area here for the very large holes in the objects. Next slide, please. So what was really interesting in expanding sort of my own understanding of conservation and sort of expanding my expectations of what it means to be a conservator was working alongside 2 other conservators for this project. We had 3 objects that allowed us to sort of approach it in 3 different ways, but still come out with products that would please the curator. And so it was really interesting to sort of ensure that the product was similar enough, but allowed for our personal decisions to come through of sort of how far the treatment should be taken, and how we sort of determined how much we reduced the wear and deterioration of that storage period. So we had one of my colleagues ended up sort of keeping all of that hazing and the leather stuck to itself to represent that storage. We also had one conservator work on representing sort of the use life with how it would have looked when a soldier had it. And then I sort of managed to be able to straddle the 2. And this will allow the curator to sort of both use them as research and exhibition pieces for a wide range of interpretation. Next slide, please. The final project I want to talk about is a trunk that is supposedly Theodore Roosevelt's, given that his initials are all over it. This is from Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. It was found in a very remote cabin on site and has thus sort of sat in unregulated conditions for who knows how long. And so this object demonstrated a lot of embedded dust. The canvas covering was misaligned due to humidity issues, and of course the leather had deteriorated quite greatly. But what was really great was we were able to understand the manufacture of the object and sort of determine what was important both materially and historically to the object, because, next slide please, they asked us to create a reproduction of the object to go into the cabin so that the original object could be saved for research. So this reproduction was a donated wicker chest to the parks. And so this is a contemporary period chest that is slightly smaller than the original. And so we have been working on sort of making it to cover the same footprint, but also it's been a great way to understand sort of the manufacture of the object and what was important. So we have determined that the original bars for the wicker were lilac, and we were able to get our own lilac to make the extenders for the top, which you can see on the far side there, and then reweave for the top. The park also decided that they wanted the top of the box to still look like wicker versus the bottom of the box, which we had found remnants of canvas that had originally lined it, and they want that for the bottom. We're also learning how to make our own oilcloth in order to cover the outside. Could I have the next slide, please? So sort of overall, this has been a really great opportunity to sort of deal with adaptability when it comes to variations and interpretations in museums. We have such a wide range of sites at the National Park Service that it's been really incredible to both hone my own hand skills and then also see sort of the different levels of treatment that we can do as conservators. And yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I can take questions.
For your work, most of the objects come to you at Harper's Ferry, or do you do very much on-site work?
For me personally, it's mostly in the conservation lab at Harper's Ferry. There are a lot of times where we have very large objects that we cannot take, and our registrar is also not comfortable ferrying firearms to our site, so we go on site for things like that. This summer I'll be working on a canoe out in Isle Royale that we have determined cannot be moved. And we also work on, of course, sort of large outdoor objects like mills and things like that as well, that of course cannot be moved.
For the silver that was given to the Eisenhowers, is there a specific reason why those were not registered with the White House Historical Commission as gifts, or were they after his presidency?
It's unclear. A lot of it seems like it's either before or after. A lot of the stuff currently that's sort of recently been cataloged has been stuff that his children have given to the park.
So for the coating, for that same silver object at the Eisenhower room, is like the main characteristic you're looking for just a material that's like non-conductive?
No, it's just sort of limiting how much corrosion we get over time. So both with the storage, we're going to work on a new storage solution for them, but also we've decided to coat all of their stuff with agatine because it's on open display year-round. And so we decided on cellulose nitrate just based on other historic houses, but most of those houses also use this dye that we have decided that is not worth it.
So how many places are you testing to
We're kind of going all around. We've only done it on a few objects so far. Thankfully, a lot of our objects are quite small. So it's sort of like taking a sample of maybe like a third of the object and sort of going around and testing different spots very meticulously to make sure that it's, if it's just this one spot that needs more lacquer. And this is still relatively new to us even because we're like, we can't use coumarin. Is there another way we can test this? So we're kind of working it out in that sense.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Elena will introduce our next speaker.
All right, our next speaker is Valeria Pesce. She's a young professional who graduated in 2022 from the Brera Academy of Fine Arts in Milan with a master's in conservation of paper, books, photographs, film, and digital media. During her studies, she gained work experience as an intern in conservation and research departments in Europe at the National Gallery in Prague, Czech Republic, and at the National Library of Norway, Oslo. As a recent graduate, Valeria interned at Restaurant Studio in Leiden, Netherlands, where she trained in traditional East Asian paintings and mounting techniques. In 2023, Valeria joined the Gretchen David Welch Conservator and Training Program at the Smithsonian National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C., where she is interning in the Department of Conservation and Scientific Research.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much to WCG for giving me the possibility to show you one of my projects that I have the pleasure to work at the Asian Art Museum at Smithsonian. I'm Valeria Pesce, Gretchen and David Welch Conservation in Training. And next slide, please. And today, yes, I will show you one of the projects that I have the pleasure to working on during my internship there. Next slide, please. And the project involved the conservation treatment of 30 folios dated between 19th to 10th century, and all the folio presented Qur'an text. This is one of the examples that you can see. This is a folio. It was one of the folio that need more treatment because it was presented a lot of tear, especially across the text, and some losses across the edges. All the folios were previously bound in a book. Next slide, please. This is another example, another folio, and in this case, the folio needed less treatment. It presented more losses across the edges. So all the folios were bound in books, and then were written recto and verso. And as you can notice, the verso side present more losses in the text because of the difference of the parchment support between the air side and the flesh side. Next slide, please. So this is during the conservation assessment, we noticed different damage. The two pictures that you can see in this slide on the top are from the first folio that I show you, and the second picture for the second folio that I show you. Next slide, please. So during the conservation assessment, we noticed different media instability, discoloration, especially when there was the presence of some adhesive, and folds, deposit, losses, and tears. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. And all the folio were looked at under stereo microscope, and all the instability were consolidated. And for consolidate the instability, we use in some cases isinglass, and in other cases we starch. And this depended according to the damage. So if the damage and the flicking was more related to the ink. We use in that case is isinglass. It was the lifting was more related to the parchment support. In that case, we use starch. And next slide, please. In that area, you can see the same detail before and after treatment, before and after the consolidation. Next time, please. So this was related to the consolidation of the ink. But during our treatment, what we want to test was also, and selected was also a material and an adhesive, a combination between material and adhesive that was useful for repair the parchment stopper, especially when the parchment stopper presented tears across the text. So for mending, we selected different stopper and adhesive. The stopper was selected between material that are commonly used in our field for conservation, for repair and parchment support, and also two different of nanocellulose products that are recently introduced in our field. In this particular case, we decided to test two different type of products, of nanocellulose products. One is a cell by the supplier as nano tissue, or also known as bacterial cellulose, and you can buy already made in sheets. And this type of sheets contain inside also Japanese fibers, and this gives a specific characteristic. The second type of typology of product that we test is known with the common name of nanocellulose or cellulose nanofibrillate, and is provided by the suppliers in aqueous gel. Next slide, please. So the aqueous gel, 3 different samples were given to us in order to be tested by a Canadian supplier, and they came in different formulation as aqueous gels. Next time, please. So as you can see, we prepare the film with the aqueous gel, all the 3 different aqueous gel, but after create the film with casting method, we decided to proceed to test only the first typology, because it was the only one that presented an appearance that was possible to use for our purpose, that was to find the support for repair parchment support. The other 2 products, the other 2 aqueous gel, after create the film with the casting method, look very brittle, and they had this plastic appearance, and so was not they were not useful for our purpose. Next slide, please. So all the material that we selected, also the nanocellulose product, were prepared in a remorsable form. In this phase of our treatment for our test, we wanted to find a combination of material and adhesive in order to repair the parchment stopper and the material. We prepare all the material in a remorsable form. But in the case of the film that was created by with the aqueous gel, we couldn't apply the adhesive, water-based adhesive directly on the nanocellulose, because they were this type of film were they were very sensible to the direct application of aqueous water-based adhesive. So in this occasion, we found it that was useful to apply the adhesive indirectly. So just apply the adhesive on a silicone release through a screen, through which we reach a very uneven surface, a very even film, and then we flip on it the nanocellulose. Next slide, please. So when all the material were prepared in a remorsable form, we decide to conduct some reactivation test. Next slide, please. So, and the reactivation test method. So we use 3 different types of reactivation methods according to the adhesive that we use and select. For the one for Clusel M and HPMC, we use solvent, ethanol, and it was directly applied by brush because we didn't have any issue. But for the water-based adhesive, in one case, in the case of starch, we use a very slightly damp blotting paper where we lay on it the strip of our material. And for the case of gelatin and isinglass, We use also in this case a blotting paper, a little bit damp, but in this case we use also it in order to reactivate the adhesive. Next slide, please. So, and we create two different set of samples. With the first set of sample, what we want to know, what we want to test, was only the properly reactivation of the adhesive. So in this case, we just cut strips of our mending material, like pre-coated with a different adhesive, and we reactivate according to the three different methods that I show you, and then we line on a piece of a copy paper, standard copy paper, because we want only to see with this set of sample, we want to test if the adhesive was reactivated 100%. With the second set of sample, what we want to test in this case is the reactivation of our repair material on parchment. So we cut this strip of parchment. The parchment was selected because the appearance was similar of the parchment support that we had, and we create these tears that was mended with different combination. Next slide, please. So, and all these samples were tested through the use of tensile testing, thanks the collaboration with John Hopkins University that let us to use their instrument. And this is how the instrument looks like. There are two clamps, and then the clamp are slowly pull apart the two part of the strips. Next slide, please. And then after something breaks, and this breaks is measured by number. For each combination of mending material and adhesive, we create three different samples because we want to have like a standard. And this is a picture of overall all the combination and all the samples that we made. And now we are in the process to look the data and to make some comparison and to analyze all the data. Next slide, please. But what we have found it very useful is also to look at with a micro camera how the mending material breaks under the tension of the instrument. Next slide, please. So, for example, in this slide you can see compare. In both cases, the material was pre-coated with gelatin at 5%. But in one case, we are seeing the mending, so the repair that was made with bacterial cellulose, and in the second case, the repair was made with tengusho, Japanese paper. So we can see the difference. In one case, in both cases, the mending material breaks in the exactly same position of where the previous tear was made, but in one case the breaks is clear, and in the second case the instrument just pulling apart fiber by fiber of the Japanese paper. Next slide, please. And we also, these two cases, we also notice a third cases where the mending material simply left. In this cases, what failed was the adhesion of the material on the support, on the parchment support. Next slide, please. So now we are in the process to compare all these results. These are some of the preliminary thoughts and results and observation that we made. HPNC tends to fail, so tends to lift instead of remain attached on the parchment support. Isinglass and gelatin at 5% usually are sufficient enough, because we tested also the same adhesive at 8%. But usually at 5% are sufficient enough to remain adhere on the parchment support. The Gilded scheme is very difficult to handle. And then in comparison, nano tissue bacterial cellulose, the one that is contain Japanese fibers, is more opaque than the one that the film that contain only nanocellulose fibers in it. And this characteristic can be useful for us because the foliar are written recto and verso, so front and back, and so we want to find a material that will not cover as much as possible the text, because we have to intervene in the area where the text is present. Next slide, please. So this project is regarding the mending material. But what we during our study, we noticed that nanocellulose can be useful also for their texture, not only for their strand properties. For example, in this case, we decided to add a layer of nanocellulose as a last layer of an infills, because this type of film has a very opaque and transparent, and in some cases a little bit shiny as appearance as the parchment support sometimes present, especially on the air side. So next slide, please. So for give you a diagram how the infill was made. The infill was made with Korean paper, Anji paper that was previously stone, but we had on the top of the infills this last layer of nanocellulose in order to recreate the texture of the parchment. And then here you can see an example of the same support, the same area, the losses before and after the treatment. Next slide, please. And here is the same area after the treatment. With the picture is bigger for show you the results. And with this slide, next slide, please. I want to thank all the people that are involved in my internship, and also I give you some also references and the two suppliers where we purchase the nanocellulose products. Thank you so much for your time.
We'll also publish your work and research.
Thanks.
I was wondering about sort of the bacterial you were saying with the nanotissue. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, that kind of specific material was developed in Germany during a project that unfortunately there are some published. There are some papers on it, but are in German. They were not translated in English. And yes, it was developed by Garfen and Hubrick, and that's why it contains Japanese fiber inside, because it was developed for conservation. So it was the bacteria cellulose was studied during the dissertation, and then with the supplier they developed this material. And now here in US is sold by Romi.
I have a question about how compatible the two materials being parchment and nanocellulose are in terms of fluctuating humidity. The parchment is very reactive. Are they compatible in terms of their physical properties with adsorption and desorption of water, fluctuations in relative humidity?
Yes, actually, nanocellulose looks, compared to paper, looks like very more closely to parchment. Is very reactive. That's why we couldn't apply the adhesive directly by brush. So they looks very similar in also in how they respond to humidity. Yeah.
So those adhesives that you were testing, they do, in my experience, can have effects on like sheen and how they appear once they're dry. Did you have any issues with that?
Yes, in some cases, like for the Wistarch, the Wistarch has this things that you can deal with how much you can dilute the adhesives. So yes, for the Wistarch, we use the Wistarch with less water inside. Like try not to be too much, because parchment can gelatinized, of course. And then also I noticed some sheen also in the case of HPMC, but this is something that I noticed maybe. Yeah, was maybe because when we were doing the test, we used different type of parchment. So I noticed that in some cases the sheen was more visible in some type of parchment that was prepared in a way, and in different other type of parchment the sheen and also the transparent part, like the gelatinous parchment, was less visible. Thank you so much.
Third speaker.
Great. Our third speaker this evening is Genevieve Tobin. Genevieve is a conservator specializing in painted and gilded decorative wooden surfaces. Genevieve has worked as a frame conservator at the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, since her graduation from her Master of Arts in Cultural Materials Conservation from the University of Melbourne in 2019. She is currently the Conservation Framers Special Interest Group convener of the Australian Institute for Conservation of Cultural Materials, has worked as a freelance paintings conservator before developing an interest in gilded and polychromed wooden decorative arts and research into non-traditional gilding techniques and cleaning gilded wooden surfaces. Since 2019, Genevieve has been engaged in collaborative practice-led research focusing on solvent gels formed with partially hydrolyzed polyvinyl alcohol polymers and borax and other gel-like materials for cleaning gilded surfaces, applying this research in several brass-based overpaint removal and surface soiling cleaning treatments for AGNSW frame collections. In 2023, Genevieve shared aspects of this work in consultation with the Getty Conservation Institute as part of the GCI Cleaning Gilded Wooden Surfaces project. Genevieve is currently an Andrew W. Mellon Fellow in Preventive Frame Conservation at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., where she is training further in woodworking for conservation, assisting in preparing frames for outgoing loans, and continuing research into gel-like materials for cleaning gilded picture frames. Welcome, Genevieve.
Thank you very much for that. I didn't realize that my bio was so long. Sorry, I should have sent a much more concise, shorter bio. I'm glad that we've just had two presentations looking at treatment projects that were really lovely and really enjoyable, because this presentation is a lot more on gel materials. We're going to see a lot of pictures of gels, more so than treatments specifically. So my presentation is practice-based research into gel-like materials for cleaning gilded wooden decorative surfaces. And I just want to preface this by saying that this has been collaborative research that I've been undertaking with the previous head of frames conservation at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, Dr. Margojata Savitsky. And she's dedicated a lot of her professional life to advancing frame conservation and looking in recent years into the challenges that we have with dealing with the cleaning of gilded decorative frame surfaces. So there is a need to develop research aimed at improving the materials and the practices for cleaning gilded decorative surfaces. This talk will present an overview of my collaborative research undertaken at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, where I was working as a frames conservator for the past few years. But I will only be able to share a few key highlights from the research. Over the past few decades, we've seen an increase in the development and adoption of novel gel technologies in the field of heritage conservation, and this has expanded the landscape of possibilities for approaching cleaning challenges. Despite this, continued work does need to be done across several material disciplines in bridging the gaps between conservation scientific research and practice. Next slide, please. This is a very busy slide. So since the late 19th century, gilded picture frames have been subject to a lot of brass paste overpainting, and this was done to try and treat frames in poor condition and to make them look gold and bright again without actually addressing in-gilding challenges and restoring them in ways that might be actually more appropriate than just overpainting them. At the Archive of New South Wales, we had a huge number of frames that were systematically overpainted, so we had a very large proportion of our collection that were in that state. And then, so the overpaint, as you can see here, like significantly obscures stylistic distinctions between gilding finishes, ornament definition, potentially compromises the surface structural stability of gilding layers. If they're very thick coats of paint, they'll place mechanical stresses on underlying gilding. And with time, the brass-based overpaint oxidizes, and this presents a number of different challenges. And you can see up here, on the further left on here, you can see this interesting green reaction product. And this is carboxylate, so the formation of copper soaps, which happens a lot with gilding that is brass-based, the brass-based leaf, and that reacts with that reacts with oil and synthetic binders, and then that forms these metallic salts that form carboxylates, and that results in green corrosion products. Once that happens, you basically need to, it's irreversible, it's irretrievable, and you need to like remove that and replace that gilding. So a lot of this is also interestingly linked to like preventive, because it's like it'd be good if we didn't overpaint things and then we wouldn't have this issue. Yes, next slide please. So the challenge of removing paint requires employing safe and practical removal methods, and this often necessitates repair and reintegration of damages underneath the paint. It's quite an archaeological process. And then we've also got challenges with removing surface soiling, contaminants, and other like combination soiling-based materials from gilded surfaces. And water gilding is particularly sensitive to polar organic solvents and also to water-based solutions, and this forms a large part of what we have available to us with a lot of gel technologies. So the efficacy to remove a lot of the surface soiling is reliant on water-based systems, which the gilding is very sensitive to. I've just got up here some images where you can see just how filthy and soiled frames get and how we do want to remove that. And then just on the left here, I've got a silicone emulsifier, which we've found very useful for targeting water-soluble dirt components from like highly sensitive gilding, like burnished water gilding. And this is a KSG 350Z silicone emulsion, which is thinned with D5 solvent. Next slide, please. So what I've primarily been looking at are polyvinyl alcohol borax gels, but I'm also looking at polyvinyl alcohol gels that will be cross-linked with benzene 1,4-diboronic acid, and that's BDBA. The advantages with they have two distinct different advantages. So the borax gels, the benefit of these are that they're rigid and flexible, they conform fully to surfaces, they adhere to vertical and high relief surfaces, they peel straight from the surface, they self-heal so you can remold them, reshape them, they constrain large percentages of organic solvents and small percentages of chelating solutions, they have a very slow controlled diffusion, cleaning action, and they also have no demonstrable residues either. Early explorations with these materials showed that they behave unpredictably, especially when incorporating a range of organic solvents, and that's primarily what my work is about. This research arose in response to the need to identify trends in the physical working properties of these materials so that we can better understand how to formulate them successfully for conservation treatments and make them practically accessible materials. The good thing about the ex-PVAC BDBA gel is that you can develop this without any water. So I'm looking into that for creating a gel that is really good on highly water-sensitive surfaces. Also going to look at the viability of PDMS elastomers. The good thing about this is that they're commercially available, and they purportedly can be soaked in non-polar solvents as well as oxygenated solvents. So you do have that flexibility and polarity there as well. So they're potentially good for cleaning water-sensitive surfaces. However, there does need to be a lot of practical investigation done into whether that's going to be feasible or not, and that's what I'm hoping to do over the next 2 years. Next slide, please. So polyvinyl alcohol is a water-soluble semi-crystalline synthetic polymer. It's synthesized by the hydrolyzation of polyvinyl acetate. The properties of these polymers have been researched since the 1980s. However, applications for them in conservation treatments is still relatively novel. Welch's gel-like materials are straightforward to prepare. They essentially just consist of polymer, your organic solvent and water component, and your crosslinker, your borax and water component. Producing viable gels, depending on formulation parameters, is contingent on several factors. Next slide, please. So the degree of the hydrolysis of the polymer, the molecular weight of the polymer, concentrations of the polymer, concentrations of the borax, properties of organic solvents in the system, and the concentrations of the solvent and the chelating agents all have a massive impact on the physical properties of these systems. As I mentioned before, when I was investigating these and using them very successfully in overpaint removal and surface cleaning treatments, we found that they did behave unpredictably, and so we wanted to look at all of these factors systematically and try to work out where the most optimal parameters were for designing workable gels. Next slide, please. This is just a brief little detour in the chemistry of it, just to explain that the hydrolysis of the polymer is actually very crucial to like the success of gels, depending on what you're trying to put in them. And this is a diagram from Angelova, who's done a lot of work. All her career, early career, has been on the polyvinyl alcohol borax gels. And really what we're after are polymers that are partially hydrolyzed, the low hydrolyzed polymers. They've got more acetate side groups, which means that they can facilitate solubilization in organic solvents and greater proportions of those. It's also interesting to note that the research into these systems tends to focus on polymers with a higher degree of hydrolysis, and these are better suited for hydrogels and not so much for organogels. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of basically a snapshot of all of the experiments that I've run. I've been running more, but this is more cogent. And what I was looking at was 4 different polymers, so 4 different hydrolyses, low hydrolyzed polymers and high hydrolyzed polymers, and looking at incorporating a range of different solvents that are applicable for cleaning gilding. And you can see them down the side there. Varying solvent ratios, and all of these gels have a proportion of water in them as well, because that's necessary for the borax salt as a crosslinker, and it also does assist in the formation of the gel and the cleaning efficacy. Next slide, please. So part of our challenge with this, because we didn't have access to instrumental analysis, we were looking at it very much from a practice-based angle, like how useful are these materials physically to handle, to manipulate, to peel from surfaces. And we were looking more at that, knowing that the solvents that we were putting in there were effective for various cleaning treatments that we were looking at. So we were really after exploring the physical properties of these systems. And so I created a language to try to describe how we would evaluate these, and this is what we came up with. And I'm just missing one criteria point off here, and that's residues. I did mention before that they don't produce residues, but I was using that in a broader sense to describe when you peel a material and if it fragments and leaves gel deposits. With these materials, they're relatively easy to peel those deposits off, so they don't leave any messy kind of gel on the surface. Desirable gels would be soft and firm, so that they're robust enough to handle and manipulate, dry but with good tack so that they stick to vertical surfaces, and elastic so they shape, mould and peel remove without breaking. Next slide, please. So the successful formulation of organic solvent gels exhibit desirable working properties, we really noticed was greatly affected by two factors in particular. That was the degree of hydrolysis of the polymer and the organic solvent that we're putting in the system. This you can see here on the right, there's a 75 PVAC polymer and as acetone gel, and then there's a 40 PVAC polymer acetone gel on the left, and you can see that there's a real difference in the morphology of the gel, and that's really evident that the 40 PVAC is best suited for organic solvent gels. And this is interesting because the literature does say that the 75 PVAC and the 40 PVAC are both good for organogels. And they do gel and they are workable, but they do greatly differ in their degree of elasticity and moldability and cohesion in that complex. And so the 40 PVAC gels were very good to work with. Next slide, please. Having said that, if you reduce the solvent content in the system, you get a vastly different result. So you can see this is the same polymer with 50% organic solvent versus 30% organic solvent, and already the morphology is different. So if you're wanting a gel that's got more water in there with a little bit of organic solvent, then this polymer would be suitable. Next gel, please. Next slide, please. Next gel, yes. Benzyl alcohol gel. Okay. So benzyl alcohol is very useful for us. It does have a very high swelling rate, so we do want it in a gel. It doesn't sit well at all in the 75 PVAC or the 80 PVAC in 50% concentration. In the 40 PVAC, you can see that it sits in there. Interestingly, if you were to combine it in a very small percentage with a hydroalcohol, which has the H bonding capacity for the methylated spirits, it will sit in a very high hydrolyzed polymer, and that's what you're seeing right here, the 87 PVAC. And you can make quite a peelable gel with that, but there is a very high water content in that gel. Next slide, please. So this is quite a contrast. Essentially, these systems are very sensitive to salt solutions, so that also includes the sodium in the borax crosslinker. So you don't want to put too much borax solution in the gel. And you will get a syneresis effect, so it'll phase separate, or it just won't gel properly, or it'll disassociate and have issues. We worked with the recommended parameters in the literature for 0.5% chelating solution, and that's really the acceptable amount that you can get into these systems before you have issues. But what my research did show is that the increase in the polymer and an increase in borax specifically actually results in a gel that goes from a gel that's not functional to a gel that is functional. So just that 1% increase in borax gives you a completely different result. Next slide, please. Okay. I've got too many slides. All right, so now we're on to research that I'm hoping to develop further. Technically, these gel systems can't incorporate non-polar solvents. And they can incorporate polar organic solvents. However, there are some exceptions, because based on my research, acetylacetone, which is technically a water-soluble polar organic solvent, does not sit in these systems at all. I can't get it to gel. It's a very useful solvent for targeting oxidation products, and we use it for overpaint removals occasionally. However, something like D-limonene, which I wouldn't ordinarily use, but one of my paintings colleagues came to me looking to customise a gel for a painting cleaning challenge that they had. And so we came up with this, we tried it out because I saw that D-limonene was miscible with a hydroalcohol, so you could actually mix that with D-propanol. And so if it's miscible with D-propanol, maybe we could actually get it in the system. So I think that there's some interesting work that could be done in and around maybe having certain combinations of slightly non-polar solvents in these gel systems. But you will get this syneresis, which is this expulsion of liquid from gel. You can see though that hasn't had an effect on the gel's working properties. Like you can still produce quite a good flexible moldable gel from that. You just might want to blot it dry, a little bit wet and decant the solvent from the jar. So that's very interesting. The ex-PVSE BDBA gel, I have actually just started working with, and I've done some preliminary experiments with these, and I found that they're actually more sensitive than the PVSE borax gels to differences in components and the ratios of those. So I feel like there's a sweet spot that we need to hit depending on what we're trying to formulate and what we're trying to put in that system. And I might just go next slide, actually. So I had a look at, there is a paper, I should say a lot of the research that I'm going into, the territory I'm going into now, Teresa Duncan and Barbara Berry have done a lot of work on these materials. This is from one of their papers, and I basically looked at all of the solvents that they had put into these gel systems, and based off their results worked out what would be a viable pathway to explore going forward. And as you can see here, dimethyl sulfoxide and 2-ethoxyethanol salicylic look like they'd be promising solvents to dissolve both the BDBA crosslinker and the polyvinyl alcohol. And so I started with 2-ethoxyethanol salicylic, which a few of you are familiar with, perhaps. I've never used it before, actually. Next slide, please. Yeah, we're on this slide and one more slide. Thank you. So these are my preliminary experiments so far. And yeah, I've had only one gel come out of all these that I'm remotely happy with. And interestingly, I've raised the polymer concentration a little bit higher than what was recommended in the literature because, and I might just go next slide to have a look. Next slide, please. You can see the differences, drastic differences in morphology here. So the gel that's recommended in the literature is the one sitting in the middle here, and it's extremely viscous. So it's soft, it does have an interesting property where it will retract on itself. So I mean, bearing in mind that all my evaluations and all of this work is very much keyed around what I'm after for certain applications, like moulding to high relief surfaces, being able to peel them and extricate them easily. You know, other conservators will have different properties in mind for what they're after. So it's not that it's not a workable gel, it's just that it's not a desirable gel within the parameters that I'm looking at. Whereas if I increase the polymer, which I have done to the right, to the left, there's a drastically different result there, and that's much more what I'm looking for, is something that's robust so you can pick it up. So it's slightly stiff, but it's still flexible and still mouldable. I don't have a photo here to show you, but this is elastic enough to conform to different areas, and it can be peel removed pretty easily. So the problem now is that given this very specific result parameter, making adjustments in and around this and incorporating other solvents is going to be interesting. I will note that in this particular paper, there wasn't any success in gelling acetone. I've managed to get acetone into this system, like including it with salicylic, so doing a solvent mixture. So more work needs to be done on that. Anyway, thank you for, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have time for any questions?
I have a really quick question.
Sure.
Only because I've had to do a lot of work with agar lately. Have you attempted to increase the temperature of the gels prior to application in order to increase the flow into the cartridge that sits? And then have you considered using methoxypropanol with anything, considering it's...
Methoxypropanol, I have gelled methoxypropanol. Yeah. So you can, so all the anything that's that can hydrogen bond, anything that's like a hydroalcohol sits very well in these systems. So yes, heat. They're actually more sensitive to heat. Heat there's a question mark over that. I haven't read anything across the literature that suggests that it could be used to change the rheology of the material. That's really very much bound up in their the intramolecular reactions that are happening with the incorporation of these organic solvents, with the increase or decrease in the polymer and the crosslinker. But it is an interesting. I have often wondered about what role heat plays in the in the production of the gels, because I do heat them to dissolve the polymer faster, because you can you can either have it dissolving for hours and hours, or you can put it on temperature for an hour and you've got a dissolved polymer. So a lot of what I'm doing, I'm very interested in making these materials more accessible and more part of practice, like something that we can easily access. And rabbiting on.
How much we often heat materials in order to use them, I can't help but think that would allow for more ease of use for creating a film that conforms to a really high surface or high relief surface.
I know.
Something over 20.
Yeah, they're not. I think aspects of application and removal could be interesting, like looking at methods of using these, and I'd like to incorporate that in the future with my studies, in addition to analytically monitoring the effects of these on gilded surfaces, which is the next part, which is more analytically focused. But it's an interesting point. I know that the good thing about agar is you can spray it in a heated solution, you can do lots of. They don't do well with organic solvents, so it's and again they're very high, even though they're highly retentive with water, they're still too much for water gilded surfaces. Some of the time they're fine.
Perhaps Jen could stay a little bit.
We can continue it up.
We'll need
Session
to end our
afterwards, yes.
program.
Thank you.
Thank you to all those speakers.